Good morning. My name is Angela Westhoff-Johnson. I'm the manager of music editorial here at OCP and the director of music at St. Mary's Cathedral in Portland, Oregon. I will be answering the questions you submitted through the registration process this morning, and I'm really excited to spend the next hour with you. I also have with me Jethro Higgins, who will be assisting in providing our technical needs during our time together. We want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us, and we hope this information is very helpful to you. Let's begin with a prayer. Lord, a choir director once said, at this morning's performance, whether he knew it or not, he thought of the music ministry's role as performing rather than praising. Oh Lord, what a dangerous difference. The moment a choir forgets what it is about, the moment we start worshiping ourselves and our sound instead of you, at that moment we lose our power to serve the body of Christ. We lose the ability to fill your house with authentic praise. We lose our call as ministers of song. We become frivolous ornaments, shadows of what we are to be. Keep us mindful of our calling. Keep our hearts and minds in a posture of service. May we never presume that those gathered have come for our benefit, but always to worship you. Keep our music fitting to that worship so that our song will never outshine the ritual itself. Let our song enhance and enliven your sacred rite. Lord, if we have failed to do this in the past, we ask your forgiveness. We mean to sing for you alone. Amen. That's from More Choir Prayers by Jeannie Hunt. There's 2 volumes of those, Choir Prayers and More Choir Prayers. I use those all the time to begin our choir rehearsal. So before we get started, we have a few things to talk about. Close your other programs or applications so that it improves your viewing and sound quality. For questions, use the question section on your control panel. Questions can be typed in at any time. Answers will be given at the end if we have time. Again, thank you for spending your time with us, and let's get started. So the first question, I'm interested in music for a small 2 or 3-part choir for the Easter Triduum. Do you have any suggestions? I just came up with a list of 11 or 12 here. There's 12 actually on this list. Beginning actually during Ash Wednesday, this setting of Miserere, Prayer of Repentance. Lovely setting for 3-part choir. Glory in the Cross by Dan Schutte is an SAB arrangement that actually has text for Holy Thursday, for Good Friday, and for Easter. There's another piece I love so much by Father Christopher Wilcock. It's called To Serve is to Reign. Wonderful text for Holy Thursday during the foot washing. If I, Your Lord and Master by Stephen Dean, also for the foot washing. New to Breaking Bread this year, last year, is Crux Fidelis by Tom Kenzie, a text by Rory Cooney. Beautiful, beautiful piece. Now you'll see here on the music, it is 3-part. I was going to say you can take 4-part music and adapt it for 2 or 3-part. I do that all the time. So don't be afraid to kind of rework things if needed. Couple of pieces for the Easter Vigil, Most Holy Night by Dan Schutte, and the well-known piece Christ Be Our Light that is so loved in the many parishes for general use. There's Easter Vigil verses as well for that. So it's wonderful to incorporate pieces of music that your congregation or that your choir already knows. A new arrangement of This Joyful Eastertide, wonderful, well-known hymn, a 3-part arrangement by Richard Hillert. Don't overlook that. That's a great new choral offering. 3 days to the tune of Thaxted. It is arranged by Jeffrey Honore. I can't speak highly enough about this piece, this arrangement. You'll see here that there's brass quartet. I can't see that far. It's quartet. There's timpani also. You don't have to use the brass to make this piece really work. It is written for 4-part choir. But you could do it in unison with a grand kind of organ feeling. So adapt as needed. The text by M.D. Ridge is really powerful, a powerful piece. And of course, the Gustav Holst Thaxted hymn is always beautiful. Another hymn arranged by Lynn Trapp, The Day of Resurrection, is great for Easter Sunday. And there's another piece by Anne Quigley, Easter Litany, for the Easter season. Probably not for Easter Sunday. It doesn't have that sort of grand feeling that we kind of expect when you walk into Mass on Easter Sunday, but really wonderful for the Easter season, Easter Litany. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Can you define performance music versus congregational music and share the best times to teach each respectively? Well, performance music, I never like to use the word performance music in liturgy. So there are moments in the liturgy when a choir sings alone. I think, as our first opening choir prayer said, we never think of a choir singing in liturgy as a performance. So I wouldn't use the word performance, but there are definitely times when the choir sings alone. Choral music certainly has its place in the liturgy, as Sing to the Lord, Music in Divine Worship so effectively states and emphasizes the importance of a choir. But it must not minimize the participation of the congregation. That's the most important role of the choir, to support the congregation in their own singing. But at times the choir performs in its ministry. This is a quote from Music in Divine Worship. At times the choir performs its ministry by singing alone. The choir may draw on the treasury of sacred music, singing compositions by composers of various periods in various musical styles, as well as music that expresses the faith of various cultures that enrich the church. We'll talk about bringing in different cultures and into liturgy later, but the text of the music must always be appropriate, if possible, to the readings of the day. That's the single most important thing. There are general texts, Eucharistic texts also, that will work on each Sunday. But my choir sings 2 choral anthems at least every Sunday, one at the preparation and presentation of the gifts, and one just as the communion procession is ending. We don't like to use the word meditation, but it really serves as that purpose. After people have received the Eucharist, there is a moment of meditation that happens in the space. So that's when we sing a communion anthem at that time. All right, how do you draw energy and enthusiasm from your choir? I think this means, how do you draw that out of your choir? But when I first read this question, I thought, how do you draw energy? How do I draw that from my choir? And I thought, I love this, because I do feed from their energy. But I think the question is, how do you get it out of them? Well, you first must be energetic and enthusiastic to get your choir to be energetic and enthusiastic. So I love choral singing of any ability. I just am always amazed by multiple voices singing together. So you can sing in unison. I love that. I get excited about little things, like when I work on something with the choir and they get it and I scream, I'm like, yes, that's it. So I think those little things, I act silly and get goofy and am constantly getting excited. And so I don't really have that problem of getting them to be energetic and enthusiastic, because I think I overdo that. Not as an act, but it really just comes out. So when they do something well, when your choir's just, they've got it, boy, let them know how great they sound. Even when they don't sound great, you've got to get them to sound great. So give them little bits of positive feedback and reinforcement. And I think the rest happens. They become energetic from that. Okay, let's move to the next one. Can you recommend hymns in multiple languages for adult and children's choirs? Well, it's really important to sing in other languages, and I know it can take some time to get to that point. There's another question I think later on that talks about incorporating other languages into a primarily English-speaking community. Well, my congregation is definitely an English-speaking community, but each Sunday we do something in another language, whether it be Latin. Of course, the importance of Latin in the liturgy is obvious. There are different ways to incorporate Latin. It can be the simple, ordinary of the Mass. Do the simple chant Mass. There's going to be multi-generational emphasis in your assembly is made up of many ages. So bringing in some of the Latin ordinary will definitely have meaning to your older generation, and it will teach the younger generation what the important Latin text. So always sing something in another language. Bilingual music is very important. I incorporate Spanish through our communion songs. I didn't provide a list here, but if you do want a list of those, we can send those to you. But you don't have to speak Spanish to be able to sing a refrain in Spanish. So one of my favorite pieces is Amen el cuerpo de Cristo by John Schiavone. There's another piece by Ricky Manalo, Ang Katawan ni Cristo, Behold the Body of Christ, that incorporates the Filipino language. Again, they're phonetic languages, so it's not like reading Vietnamese. They're pretty simple to get your congregation to sing along with those. Intercessions. Maybe seasonally sing the intercession response. We have a few really wonderful ones. Ricky Manalo has multilingual intercessions that incorporate 4 different languages or more, but I think he has written those for like 100 different languages. It's amazing, truly amazing what he's done with those. We sing those in Spanish, Filipino, Latin, and English, and they'll pick up on that response very quickly. Rufino Zaragoza also has a quadrilingual intercessions, and those are just little ways to incorporate splashes of other languages while not overwhelming, having to teach your assembly a lot of text. And you can also incorporate other cultures into your liturgies by adding music of other origin without having other texts. So maybe a spiritual African origin, but in English. There's a wonderful choral anthem that Barbara Bridge has provided. It's called Kibona Lesedi. Again, a phonetic, it's a tribal language, but it's very easy to pick up. It has lots of energy. So in the month of January, I always do a few spirituals, which is a wonderful way to welcome in the feeling of another culture, and it's not too overwhelming for your choir or your assembly. I love this question. I want to challenge experienced choir members by planning choral anthems, but also want accessibility for my amateur choir members. Do you have recommendations? Well, this is a great question because we hope our choirs are always growing. So someone's new every year. And while we have to have a choral repertoire to build from and to add to, everything can't be new every year. For the new people, everything is new. I tell people it takes 3 years to feel like you know what you're doing when you join my choir. So this year I had 4 new choir members, which I loved. But when I pull out a piece of music that the choir has been doing for several years, like something for Holy Week, and the look on the faces of the new people on an 8-part anthem, is, oh my gosh, what have I gotten myself into? So I usually spend a little time after rehearsal and say, you're doing great. It's overwhelming, I know, but you're doing great. So I think you have to select music that works for the majority of your choir. You cannot adapt so much to new choir members or to musicians who are very rudimentary if the majority of the choir is more advanced, because you'll lose your advanced choral singers. So be careful when allowing new members to come into the choir. It's kind of a catch, because you want more members, but you also need to keep the focus on improving the choir. So, and being challenged will keep them coming to rehearsals. If the music doesn't need a rehearsal, they will stop coming. Having said that, choose a few pieces throughout the year that are in unison, because it's the best way to work on improving a choral sound. We often think as choir directors that the more parts, the more rewarding for an assembly to listen to that. That's not true. There's nothing more beautiful than a unison choral sound with amazing vowels that are all unified and cutoffs that are exactly together. So choose some pieces that make your new members feel a little more confident, but you can't choose everything that way. So be selective. It's a challenging position to be in, but I'd forge ahead with where the ability of the majority of the choir is. Thanks for that question. I liked that. Are there a certain number of Mass settings a parish should use, and how often should I change them? Can you also address this question for a small church that has a choir with limited abilities? Well, this is a question I think that it pertains to each parish. So some parishes may only change a couple of times during the year. Other parishes may have them in their repertoire and feel the need to mix things up a little bit more. I change them seasonally, and I think it adds to the feeling of a new season. That's the most important aspect for me, that Advent feel different than Christmas, and Lent feel very different than Easter. So I change them for Advent and Christmas. So 4 weeks of one Mass isn't a lot. That's the difficulty. So keep that Mass going for a few years during Advent. And it should have that feeling of Advent, of anticipation. Christmas, of course, needs to have its own deal. A lot of people feel the need to use a Mass setting maybe based on some Christmas carols. We offer that as people come in maybe once or twice a year for Christmas. You want them to be able to participate and feel welcome, and using a Mass that's based on a carol or a few different Christmas carols, like our Christmas Gloria. That's a great a setting of the Gloria where people will join in, even if they haven't been to church for years. So Christmas should have its own feeling. I keep that Mass going, maybe dressed down a little bit, but of course, Christmas, we use brass and add instruments. And then as you move into ordinary time 1, keep that Mass going and don't use those instruments. Have it feel a little different. I always do a chanted Mass during Lent. Right now we are doing the Missa Ubi Caritas, a wonderful Mass. There's an option in Latin or in English. We do it in Latin. Bob Hurd adapted that Mass, and Craig Kingsbury did the beautiful choral parts that really make that Mass, beautiful. And Easter, I usually go back to the one I've done at Christmas, unless you've done one based on a Christmas carol. We don't want to do that. But we are doing the Mass of the Resurrection by Randall DeBryan, who has brass quintet and timpani. And then Ordinary Time 2. I often will go to a much more simple Mass, like the Heritage Mass. We're showing you right here Choral Praise. Choral Praise has 9 different Mass settings. Choral Praise is a wonderful resource for choirs that are building. The question here was a small church that has a choir with limited abilities. Choral Praise offers wonderful reduced choral offerings. So if an octavo has, a different harmonization for every verse, Choral Praise may offer you 2 harmonizations, like verses 1, 2, and 3 have one choral writing, and the other verses have a different one. Or they may offer a refrain that is in 2-part with a descant in unison verses. So it really is ideal for a small parish choir who is growing in their ability but isn't overwhelmed immediately. 570 songs is a lot. The great thing about Choral Praise is it supports our missal products, Breaking Bread, Today's Missal, and the Heritage Missal. So do investigate Choral Praise. What are your thoughts on bilingual music in an English-only parish? I talked a little bit about that already. Bilingual music must be present in all parishes. We should incorporate music of other languages. Now, there are ways to do that so it doesn't overwhelm anyone. A refrain is the best way to do that, and do it bilingually. Often our bilingual music offers Spanish only, English only, or bilingually. So there's very little Spanish in a bilingual refrain, maybe a phrase or 2. And then do the verses all in English if you're an English-only parish. But it will give the feeling of more bilingual music, offering music in different styles that are accessible. It really is very, very important to incorporate Latin and Spanish into your liturgies, even if you are only speaking English primarily. I love this question also. I know the music we select should coincide with the readings. However, how strictly should we follow this? Well, that's a great question because it's really difficult to find music that just strictly follows the readings. I always begin planning by reading the lessons. And I read them a couple of times. And usually by the time I've read them, something pops out. And I jot down on another piece of paper to the side a few different pieces. Now, gathering and sending forth hymns, those are a little more tricky because the feeling of those should be welcoming in as we gather today. We gather together. So those, I am less concerned about them following the readings exactly, but I do start with the readings. It's really important, and there are so many different themes that come out of readings that are present in congregational pieces. You'll see a hymnary over to the side here, Within Our Hearts Be Born. Michael Joncas, brilliant Michael Joncas. I have great respect for him as a composer, as a writer. He has many, many years of experience as a homilist, and these offerings that he has, We Contemplate the Mystery, is the one for Lent and the Triduum, which we are actually working on right now. So that one's not available yet, but will be in the next few months by the summer. But do look at Within Our Hearts Be Born for Advent and Christmas. The wonderful things about these is he has all newly written texts set to well-known hymn tunes. So, and Sunday by Sunday. So how stringent should we be? How strictly should we follow the readings? This hymnary by Michael Joncas allows you to be very strict with each Sunday during the season. So do take a look at these. And he has written a commentary about the text and about sort of based on some of his homilies, how he wrote these new texts. They're really, really wonderful ways to, even if you don't use those hymns every Sunday, boy, to learn more about the readings for each day, I find them very, very valuable. Can you discuss vocal warm-up exercises? Well, vocal warm-ups are really, really important, But as a choir director, I know how hard it is to either find new ones that sort of engage your choir or to find the time. So we have limited rehearsal time. I begin rehearsal at 7 o'clock. I expect people to be there by 10 to 7. It doesn't always happen, but I expect them to be there and get their rehearsal music in order. And so we can begin warming up by a minute or two before 7 o'clock. We go from 7 to 9, and since I don't ever keep them long, I expect them to be there on time. If they continue to come late, then I might keep them a few minutes late. But it's important to start with vocal warm-up exercises. It's sort of like the stretch before you go out for the run. And we know that sometimes the older we get, the more stretching we need to do. The same is true for the voice. So don't shortchange your choir with vocal warm-ups. Now, there are different ways to do that without spending 10 minutes singing, ma, me, mi, mo, mu on one note. So there are different ways to do that. You can also, spend maybe a minute doing different vocal exercises and go into one of your pieces that's in unison with a lower register that they can continue to warm up through the repertoire you're working on. So you don't feel like you're spending 10 minutes on vocal warm-ups and wasting that valuable time. So be creative how you do that. So you can do that through your own repertoire. I like to warm up with the psalm. I am a very big supporter and user of respond and acclaim. I realize that there is some lack of variety in them, but that for me is not a bad thing. You always know what you're going to get, and I like that very much. It takes some of the planning out. It takes a lot of the planning out of the liturgy of the word. So I've been using respond and acclaim for 22 years. We do them in parts all the time. So, and mix it up a little. Women sing one verse, men sing one verse, sing in 4-part, add the descant. You can make them sound really more complicated than they are and very beautiful. But we warm up with the psalm on Sunday morning. And it's a great way to warm up and use that time to work on repertoire that they'll be using in the Mass just shortly. All right, the next question. Can you recommend some good resources to select music for weekday Masses in a school setting? Well, we have I'm sure you're aware of Rise Up and Sing, and if you aren't, do look at Rise Up and Sing. We'll show you a little bit, the cover of that a little bit later. Rise Up and Sing is a resource for children. It's a children's hymnal. It has psalms. It has songs for the school year. For the major feasts, it has sacramental preparation music. So it's a wonderful resource for children in the school setting. I haven't been teaching in a classroom setting for many years, so I know that different schools choose music differently. So I can't help you unless I know exactly sort of how you plan your music. Do you follow the readings of the day? Do you do more seasonally directed music? Is it where a different class, like the second grade, run that liturgy that week, and then the third grade do it 2 weeks later or the next week? There's limited rehearsal time, of course, and when you're planning in a school setting, sometimes the classroom teacher is planning and working on the music with the kids rather than the parish musician or the music teacher at the school. So if there's a good relationship between the school and the parish, it's ideal to have music come from Sunday liturgy and feed into the classroom so that they can fully participate both at school liturgies and at Sunday Mass. So that's not as much help as I'd like to be, but we don't have an exact resource yet. I can't tell you a whole lot more than that, but I think that we will have a wonderful resource specifically for Catholic schools and weekday masses. So be creative with how you select your music currently. One of the questions that comes up a lot is about entrance and communion antiphons. It's sort of the in vogue thing right now. If the entrance and communion antiphons are sung, does this replace the entrance and communion hymn? Well, the short answer is yes and no. It doesn't have to, but it can. So there are different ways to use the antiphons, and I can tell you how I'm using them right now. We have a wonderful, wonderful new resource by Father Columba Kelly, the St. Meinrad entrance and communion antiphons. I'm sorry, I'm thinking without it in front of me. And what the book looks like on there is an assembly book. There are keyboard accompaniment for the choir and the cantor, and those are divided into 6 different volumes, and we're still working on those, but you can currently get Advent and Christmas and Lent and Triduum right now. The others are really close to coming out. We are, for Lent, using the entrance antiphon as the opening hymn. And it's only Ash Wednesday and first Sunday of Lent, moving into the second Sunday of Lent, and I'm loving them for a number of reasons. They set the season to feel very, very different, and I like that. That's very important to me, that people come in and they know immediately what season we're in. Of course, that's not all upon us as musicians. There are people doing environment and greeters that are welcoming people, and the feeling is different during Lent. Color should be different. Environment, flowers and such should be very different, if any, sparse. But the gathering hymn, this using the entrance antiphon, definitely adds to that feeling of Lent. So the choir, as we process in, we do that seasonally. So for Lent and Easter, Advent and Christmas, we did as well. And I love that. The people of the congregation really like that as the choir walks through them into the space. So we sing the entrance antiphon itself. It's chanted, and they're in modern notation, which I think is a welcome for all of us. We do that at the entrance of the cathedral. So as people are walking in, we stand around the font, the baptismal font, and we chant the entrance antiphon. Father Columba Kelly has offered a short little congregational refrain, which I think is so wonderful. The organ then comes in. We do those a cappella, but they have accompaniment. The organ then comes in and intones the short congregational refrain. I mean short, like show us, O Lord, your saving power. That was Sundays. Show us, O Lord, your saving power. So the cantor sings it the first time, then the choir, as part of the assembly, sings it as we walk and process in down the center aisle. Then there are chanted verses. They're set to the Grail Psalm verses, which are wonderful and proper to the day. And that's so great. So the text, kind of going back to how strictly should we try to adhere to the readings. These are done for you. They have the text for that day that Father Columba Kelly has paired to the well-known Meinrad chant tones. So I'm over the top thrilled with these. They are serving as our entrance hymn. We, however, are not using the communion antiphon with the chanted verses. I love chant, but I do think if the whole liturgy is chant, it might not be as engaging for our assembly. So our communion antiphon that we are using are the choral antiphons that Christopher Walker has set. I love those. Just a short little choral anthem and then into the regular communion hymn. So yes and no, however you can use those. All right. Is it appropriate to sing any psalm during the Sunday Mass? Is there a guideline on which psalms are acceptable? You know, a good way to think of this is they don't just open the lectionary and point to a reading. So, no, it isn't appropriate to sing just any psalm during the Sunday Mass. The lectionary very clearly lists the different, is a guideline for you, lists the first reading, the responsorial psalm, the second reading, what the gospel acclamation verse is, and so forth. So that's why I love Respond and Acclaim. It's all right there for you. How do I recruit men for my choir? Challenging, isn't it? So many choirs have lots of women, which you might think would attract lots of men, but it doesn't always work that way. Recruiting men for my choir, so it can be difficult. If you have a few really good male singers, it will happen on its own. And if you have a limited size of parish, you can't expect to have 20 men if your assembly isn't very big. So, be happy with 4 to 5 men if you have that many. Don't be afraid when you see people in the assembly singing to go up and recruit. It just can never stop. I still do it today. When you hear people, I'll say, thank you so much for singing. I really can see you out there actively engaged. That might be the seed that I have to plant. And a few weeks later, I'll say, hey, have you thought about joining the choir? So just be creative with it. But if you have a few good male singers, your choir will grow. I don't try to fool anyone that I have paid section leaders. And I know not everyone has those resources or maybe the pool of singers in town to draw from. But that is a good way to grow your choir. You may need to bring in a couple of professional singers if your real goal is to build a program and to grow and to do music that's a little more challenging. That's the best way to do it. And I've never hidden that from the rest of the choir, and that's why I think it's worked pretty well in my situation. Can you suggest some easy SAB anthems for Pentecost? Well, there's a list of them here for you, and I think we could send that out to you if you can't jot those down. The edition numbers are to the side there as well. Spirit of Faith by Scott Crandall, Spirit of God, LeBlanc. I do this piece with my choir. It is 4-part, but I need to tell you, you can adapt when necessary. So you may just do it in 2-part the first year and grow with that. So don't be afraid to omit some parts and have your keyboard player play those, or take an SATB part and make it an SAB part. You can do that. Spirit of God with me, Scott Soper. Spirit of God, Christopher Walker. There's a little theme here, huh? Spirit of God. So there's some wonderful SAB music for Pentecost that OCP does offer, and here's just a few of those. I'm always happy to provide longer lists for you. So you see this Spirit of God, Christopher Walker. I really, really love this piece. It's one of those simple, if you see, there's no reason if you look on that second page there why you just leave out the oohs on the top and just use the melody there. There's Spirit of God within me. Scott Soper. Just a couple of different ideas for you. All right, what are some recommended new music selections for children ages 3 to 6? Now, I am so in awe of people who work with children of any sort, work with children, but especially musically of ages 3 to 6. This is a tough age. Some of them don't read text. They certainly aren't reading music yet at that point. So music needs to be catchy, easily learned by it being short little phrases so they don't have to remember so much. I talked about Rise Up and Sing a few minutes ago. That's what the cover looks like. It's a great resource. Lots of pieces for young children. Now, a lot happens between the age of 3 and 6. So the same piece might not be used for the 3-year-old that is used for the 6 or 7-year-old. But, maybe if they're singing with older kids, they always want to be around older kids. Stories and Songs of Jesus. There's the blue book there, and then more Stories and Songs of Jesus. I love these resources. They are certainly not new, but they are so wonderful. If you don't know them, explore them. Very appropriate for young children and very appealing to primary age all the way through. The last resource there is The Way of the Cross for Children, and I think these are so beautiful. It's the Stations of the Cross. You can do these in a classroom. There are big posters that you put up around the room for the various different stations. Not limited to children, I must say. They're simple, but very, very appealing to adults as well. So I think all 4 of these resources are not to be overlooked if you don't know them. We purchased Choral Praise 3rd edition in November 2014. That's not very long ago. And need some guidance. Is there a top 20 easiest harmonies list? I don't think that exists, but you need to be creative in finding pieces by thumbing through and start with the 2-part things. Or start with the appropriate pieces for the day, for the Sunday, for the readings, and don't sing the harmonies yet. Again, choral music does not have to be complicated as far as parts or rhythm. Some of the most beautiful choral pieces are in unison. So there isn't a top 20 easiest harmonies list. I'd be happy to help you by chatting with you on the phone about ways to incorporate and find things in choral praise. But we don't have that list. But sing things in unison, do 2 parts, or unison and descant. Be creative with how you introduce those to your choir. Can you use a seasonal psalm refrain with the verses to the psalm in the missal for Sunday? So this is a great question. These are tricky. Seasonal psalms and common psalms are a little bit tricky to fully understand. There are 3 options for doing psalms in liturgy. Of course, the appointed psalm for the day, the proper psalm, and that's where you find those in Respond and Acclaim, or our Spanish resource, Responde y Clama. You can do the common psalm, of which there are 22 common psalms, and they have verses set to them, appointed to them. And then the seasonal psalm, which is what this question refers to. There are 10 seasonal psalm responses. So the idea is that you would do the same response for all of Advent or all of Lent, so that your assembly really is participating. And then you use the verses for the actual day, first Sunday of Lent, second Sunday of Lent. And you would chant those to atone that you create. Now, finding the music is the tricky part. But yes, you can often find the psalm response, the seasonal psalm response, and then just chant the actual verses for the day. It's a great way to get your assembly really singing. By the second, Sunday of Lent, they've got a few more Sundays to sing that same response. So it's a great way to do that. Is Shepherd Me, O God, an appropriate psalm response for a funeral? Well, again, this is a good question. Ideally, we want it's a wonderful song. Let me say that first, Shepherd Me, O God. It's a great song. It is not verbatim to Psalm 23. So while it's a great song to include in a funeral liturgy, if you are trying to be following the actual text as appointed in the lectionary, your answer is no. So if you have a priest that wants you to do verbatim psalms, this one is not. But it's a wonderful song to include at another time during your funeral liturgy. Can you make suggestions for a small choir that only sings for holy days and special occasions? Well, God bless you, because that's really tough to have a choir only sing for those sorts of times. It's difficult to build a choir that can do that. You have very limited repertoire when you only sing for 5 or 6 or maybe 10 times during the year. Sometimes that's all you have, and you take what you can get. But if you could rehearse on a regular basis and only sing at those times, then I think you've got some great options, because you can begin rehearsing Advent music right after Easter, and you're set for the next beginning of the liturgical season. So we have lots of pieces that are two-part Christmas pieces, Easter, wonderful Easter hymns that you could sing in unison with a descant. So I'm not providing options for you here, but I could help you with those at another time. I would encourage you to build this choir a little bit to singing more than just holy days and special occasions, for many reasons, but there are ways to get around it if you need to. The next question, related. We're in a community in our 70s and 80s with one good singer and the rest average to poor. What would you do if you had our choir? Well, I would work on vocal production, because aging voices is a difficult thing. We know what happens. I'm fighting it myself. We start aging all the time, right? We're never going the other way. So the voice, unless it is used regularly and the support mechanism is really working for you, can get wobbly, especially with women's voices. So the tone is harder to hear, because we're hearing the rise and fall above the pitch. That's a wobble. So I would work on vocal production. Unfortunately, it's hard to do once you're 70 or 80. I love that energetic spirit of wanting to be there, but it's hard to work with voices that are that age. If you spend less time on tone, like a long held out 2-measure whole notes tied over 8 beats, that's when we really hear all the flaws. So be creative with choosing music that is maybe more rhythmic, so that they don't have to hold notes for very long. So they, pieces that have more quarter note singing and can get off of the note and not hold notes for very long. Have the women sing a verse, have the men sing a verse. Bring them together and try to work on shaping and contouring the phrase. And there are ways to make voices in their 70s and 80s sound great. I really think it'd be a fun thing to do, but you have to be really creative with that. What is the best approach for the reception of communion for the music ministers? Well, this is tricky. I think if you have a good repertoire of communion music, they should go. Ideally, the choir is not set. They are part of the assembly, and they should go to communion when the assembly goes to communion. So your assembly should be able to sing along right with them. And if you're singing a refrain of a communion song that everyone knows, it shouldn't be a problem. Sound should not instantly drop out. Now, you could have a cantor go to the mic and kind of lead the song while the rest of the choir goes to communion. That's another way. I often hear, the organist never gets to go to communion because they're at the organ and they have to start the communion song. So that's when these communion antiphons work so well. As I mentioned, Christopher Walker's choral antiphons, we always start with one of those, and the organist can go to communion at that time. So do the first communion song if you need more than one. It should be really well known so that the sound doesn't drop out. Or have them sing a cappella. What recommendations can you make for a small SAB 9-member choir rural community where the congregation doesn't participate in singing regularly. Well, that's the first thing you need to do. You need to get your congregation singing. And it's tough. It's easier said than done. Does your choir take a break in the summer? Now, my choir does, and I think it's so good for both the choir and the assembly, because ideally those choir members are coming to Mass, and they're sitting in the congregation, and they are supporting congregational singing during that time. So it's always easier for a congregation to sing well when they feel there are people mixed in with them singing really well. So ideally, the choir's role is to get your congregation to sing. You have to start slowly with introducing new repertoire. Musicians get bored easily. Assemblies do not. They can hear pieces over and over, and they feel comfortable with that. They feel at home when they know a piece, where the choir may feel bored. They can't have that thought. You've got to have music that is repeated often. You've got to start slowly if you need to get them singing new music. The other way I think to get an assembly to sing is to have the choir look like they enjoy it. You don't want it to be an act, but boy, smiling choir members speak volumes to an assembly who looks curmudgeon-y and kind of bored. So the more your choir looks like they're having fun and they're smiling and they're exuding joy, your assembly will pick up on that. I turn to the assembly and conduct and bring the assembly in. I sort of conduct them, and that really helps. I've had people from other parishes visit and say, wow, it is so warm and welcoming the way you bring us in. So that works for me. I stand on this ridiculously high podium because the cathedral's large, and so I'm pretty high up there, and I turn to them and I bring them in, and sometimes I look at them like, why aren't you singing? And I raise the worship aid sometimes to them, and I hold it up there a little while for them to realize, yep, I want you to sing, open the worship aid. So you try to do it very pastorally, but I think they get the message clearly. All right, this next one is about a pastor not wanting the Gloria sung during seasons outside of Christmas and Easter, which I was, really? The Gloria? I kind of understand where the pastor's coming from in that it's lengthy. In particular, if you do an antiphonal or responsorial Gloria, they're long. So I think explore through composed Glorias, because your congregation never has to sit out during the verses. They're singing the whole time. So the penitential rite, sorry, I see a typo up there. We do know how to spell penitential. The penitential rite should be sung as well, but I tend to, especially during outside of Advent and Lent, when the Gloria is not sung, then we always sing the penitential rite. But other times, really focus on that Gloria. I think the text is really important. So speak to your pastor and find out what the reason is. Is it only the length? If it is, then be creative. Cut some other areas. Encourage them to sing that Gloria. It's an important text for them. And this last question here, I love this question, because I always think if I ever leave my current role at the cathedral, which I'm not planning to do right now or anytime soon, I love the parish. I love my choir. But if I had to do it again, start over, I'd love to go into a parish that has no choir, because that's what I walked into 22 years ago. No program. They wanted a choir, they needed a choir, and I had to build from scratch. So I think it's lots of work, but lots of fun. I had 4 to 5 choir members that were in their 60s or 70s, and the sound was just not beautiful at that point. I began making announcements at every Mass about building a music program. I cantored at every Mass, which is a lot of work, but that's what I did for the first couple of years. And I could see people at the different Masses, all the Masses, and that's where I would approach people who were interested because I saw them singing, and I would get them interested in joining the choir. I held my choir rehearsals every week for the first 3 months when I started there, but I didn't have them sing because they weren't ready. So we rehearsed from September through November, and we sang the very first liturgy, Advent one, 22 years ago. And the sound was far from amazing or wonderful, but it was a work in progress. I felt like they were amazing because I knew what they came from. I knew what they sounded like 3 months earlier. And boy, the little bits of progress were amazing to me. I think I said this at my last webinar that I set goals for each choir year and milestones for the 3rd year, the 5th year, the 7th year, the 10th year. I mean, I knew by year 5 we needed to be doing the Bach Magnificat. And boy, in year 1, I thought, no way, are we going to get there? But we got there, we did it. So I set kind of repertoire goals. Now, you might not have that goal, but it might be a different goal. You want them to be able to sing an a cappella 4-part piece successfully and stay in tune by the end. That's important. At the end of a piece of music, an a cappella piece, go to the keyboard and play the note to see how much pitch you dropped and work toward keeping the pitch up. Little goals like that. If you don't have goals, you're just treading water. You're never going anywhere. You're never swimming forward. You're never going to get to that point. And you have to challenge them, but you have to meet them where they are and challenge them in little increments. So you can't get them frustrated by throwing music at them that is way too difficult. Or they'll quit. They will not stick with it. So I hope I helped you with that question, and I'd love to chat with. I've always said I'd love to go in and help someone build. I'd like to spend 3 months at a parish that isn't mine and kind of do a overhaul and help people out. I don't think I can do that yet, but maybe someday I can do that. So I think we're out of time, or we have some questions.
We have a few questions.
Okay,
we're not going to be able to get to all of them because we're running up against the line here. But we'll just ask a couple real quick. How do you incorporate silence and instrumental music into the liturgy?
Great. The older I get, the more I love silence. And I don't know if that's true for everyone, but I think 22 years ago, 15 years ago, I think I still tried to fill the liturgy with sound. It was like if there was a moment after communion, before the priest sat down and the announcements were made, I was motioning to the organist to keep playing. Now I don't do that as much. I think there's something very moving, spiritual about silence in the liturgy. Having said that, a full communion procession without music doesn't work. So if you're done with the communion hymn and you have 30 people still going to communion, then keep playing. That instrumental music is important.
And one more question. How do the musical tastes of your congregation play into your music selection?
Mm-hmm.
And do you have any advice for a director who's struggling with a congregation that desires music that's not a good fit for the liturgy?
That's a great question. I've had colleagues who have gone into a new parish and they had their agenda. They knew exactly what they wanted, and they needed to change everything about that parish music program. That does not work. You will not last in a program like that. It can take 5 years to change gently the music of your assembly. You have to meet them where they are. And there were pieces that I think I came in initially and did that I didn't love, but I did them for a while. And I've said to the choir, you do this piece of music like it is your favorite piece of music. It means something to someone out there. We find this at weddings and funerals a lot. Now, I will not do music that isn't appropriate. The other part of that question was, it's our duty as a music minister who's informed about the documents and to say, no, that's not acceptable. While that piece means so much to you, like maybe O Danny Boy. We have a setting of that tune, London Derriere, that has appropriate music for a funeral liturgy. So, but you can't tell people what they like. They shouldn't, because they like it. So you have to understand and be pastoral about making changes. And it'll happen over time. You've taught them, you've convinced them through your soft, gentle approach that they like something that they may not have liked originally. I had a priest who said, I don't really like hymns. How can you not like hymns? I love hymns. In fact, sometimes I think I should have been. I was born an Episcopalian or Lutheran. I don't know. I wasn't. But I love hymns like our Lutheran and Episcopalian friends do. And I think they're very fitting. In particular at a cathedral, how can you not have hymns? But you know what? He didn't love them. So each Sunday I did one fewer hymn. So I would do a congregational refrain verse piece instead, something like Christ Be Our Light, which is wonderful. He loved that. And then little by little, I think he's grown to love him. So you just can't, it's not your agenda. You have to meet the people where they are, or you will not be successful.
Well, unfortunately, we have a lot more questions, but that's all we have time for this morning.
Thank you so much for being here for the hour. I apologize for not getting to more of your questions, but we will provide answers to you. And OCP has a wonderful customer service and offer our service to you. So please do continue to call and use us as that resource. We've got some information, contact information up here, sales@ocp.org. In our 800 number, 800-548-8749. We will follow up with an email with the video and the slides for you. And then we've got some other webinars coming up, an intercultural liturgy series. You see those 4 different webinars happening April 8th, 15th, 22nd, and 29th at 9 a.m. Pacific Coast time. So thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to you being with us again at another one of our webinar offerings.